Morning, Dr. R. Michael Fisher, here on the west coast of Canada on Vancouver Island, the city of Nanaimo. It's beautiful property, this beautiful place. The Nanaimo peoples who have been here for many generations as the inherent Indigenous caregivers of this land. Thanks to all those for including all the wildlife beings and natural environment here that has supported all of us who are here today. Myself, as today I'm appearing as a early childhood educator, which I do not have a degree in early childhood education. I have a degree in curriculum and instruction and adult education. However, my focus of interest, even though I was really got my degree in education first as about a third degree and career track, and that was in secondary science to teach. But when I actually went to teach, I taught grade 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 in a small rural school. So had to be very flexible to work with all ages and didn't work with the real young ones. And I always thought, oh, wow, that are not for me. Grades 1, 2, 3, kindergarten. Oh, no. That's not for me. I just can't handle those little ones. I don't know what to do with them. I want them to be more capable of thinking and verbal and be able to, when they speak, you can actually understand what they're saying instead of trying to figure out early childhood talk when they're learning. And all those things were a really interesting challenge. And I made up my mind that, oh no, I'm better with the older kids. Partly true, no doubt at all about it, that I do work really great with the grade 5s on up. However, that's my own humble view. And yet, coming to Nanaimo, the short story is I was walking down the railway tracks and came along, heard this daycare center here. I wasn't sure if it was a school or maybe it was a play school or whatever it was. I heard young children and I could see them over the fence a little bit. And I thought, wow, this is really an exciting, energetic place. And I was kind of looking for a way to volunteer, getting connected to the community here. And that was natural as I ended up talking with the director, looking at their website, and I really liked their form of education. They seemed very open ended, very organic. They would use various philosophies that I agree with, like Waldorf, Reggio Emilio, Montessori approaches, holistic education, and outdoor schooling. That's what they called it. They have an outdoor education program, sometimes called the forest program. And they go out for half the day. And then the other young people's 3 to 5 year olds as well in another class group, they are spending half of their day or more outdoors. In fact, most of the year they're completely outdoors. Everything is happening outdoors. Even though they're in a yard, but they do go out, to visit parks and so on. But the huge difference is that I felt there was a real opportunity here, and the Nanaimo Innovation Academy, which this place was called, started 5 years ago by a particular woman, and Keely, and a group of her connections, and they've built this nonprofit organization to support this childhood education. I think in a really good way, with lots of potentials, and yet at the same time has its own limitations, like any place. So I come in and I'm working as an artist in residence, and I started using the stones. So I'm giving you a little background here. Today's video, I'm going to take off on a new iteration of the stones that I brought onto this campus of this daycare center out in basically the parking lot. And I want to talk about what I just did the other day with young children, with one of the pedagogists there, and a couple of the faculty of educators there, and a group of about 8 children, 3 to 5 year olds. Well, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because I'm very interested in where we go with children in the future. What are those limitations and habits that we can get into as adults, even in early childhood education, and not maybe be challenging the kind of potentials of children's learning, and particularly challenge their philosophical capability. Oh yeah, I thought I'd just throw that in with this new book by Alison Gopnik. It's only new in the sense that it's new in really presenting children as a philosophical interest in their development and in their capabilities to actually teach adults. Yeah, that's right. Children can actually teach adults really important philosophical ideas, according to Alison Gopnik. She's a professor of psychology, cognitive psychology, and philosopher, cross appointed at the University of California, Berkeley. And you'll see her on the internet if you want to go look up her work on YouTube. She's written many books as well. This is just one she wrote in 2009. I've been scanning through, and I will read a section of that book today because it's really this idea of revisioning what children are from some of our old habits and stereotypes and historical ideas of what children are, should be, could be, and basically they're meant to get them through this stage so they can grow up to be adults, and then that's the rest of their life. Yeah, that's really boring. And not it's only boring and not true. The reality is that it's a much more complicated story about what a human being is meant to be that I'm interested in as a curriculum philosopher, designer, thinker about. Let's just go right down to the earliest ways that we bring children into the world, socialize them, educate them, so called, and quote, train them, and etc., and expect of them to be citizens in a world that is deeply in trouble. Um, I don't need to go on and on about how deeply in trouble we are. Cascading crises is another term people have used, collapsing of our basic systems of life support and, if not sanity, uh, collapsing under our very eyes as we go into this 21st century. Well predicted. I was back in the 1960s and 70s, and the reading and research I was doing just for myself, as well as some of my career in environmental sciences at the time, was showing that, yeah, these systems will not continue to go the way they've been going and maintaining themselves in a healthy way because humans have made decisions not to follow the natural order of things, i.e., the laws of nature, for one, the cosmic laws, for two, and on, we've created cultural deviations from those that are interesting, creative, have potentials of their own, and yet evolution has its own story and trajectory that we may actually have taken some wrong paths. Yeah, to the point where we will become extinct in a not too near future, is by all predictions by many. Of course, there's always those who believe that that's a lot of hype and negative and not true. That aside, back to the children. This video today, I'm going to say read a bit from Alison Gopnik on the philosophy of children, their philosophy, as well as the philosophy adults have of children, and question that and really stir it up. So get all that sediment and sand at the bottom of the beaker stirred into the water so that it brings up what was sedimental, what was being missed, what was hidden below in the surfaces of our own unconscious habitual ways of thinking. And now to revise and really revolutionize the way we can think about education, childhood, and development. The main topic really I'm going to focus on in the latter part of the video. If you hang in there through some of this intro, you will get into how I actually worked yesterday with the pedagogist, Amanda, thank you very much, at NIA, Nanaimo Innovation Academy, for about an hour and almost a half with 3 to 5 year olds. Let's see what happened. I will go into that, a very interesting experience and experiment, really at the Stones. First of all, background. If you want to know more about my early childhood thinking, which has come about in this year and a bit now, a few months, at working on the ground as an artist in residence at this daycare center, and doing some reading, yes, but not a lot in early childhood education, getting a sense of that field, talking to some people in the field, yes, of course, watching lots of videos in early childhood education. But primarily, I'm working from my artist self. I want to stay in the field of experience of being an artist in that site, right? That site of that childhood world and its interaction with adults, those who are caregivers, the parents who are also caregivers, and those interactions and dynamics. And then that's all part of my medium. So it's a social art, very aesthetic based, very materialist based, with the stones being my primary medium that I imported in a big dump truck load over a year ago. And now just keep learning. It's a learning site. I've created a learning site, and I call it a sacred site of the stone peoples. And I'll get into ideas of why I call these things those words, and I'm conscious about it, and how I talk to the children about being with me on the stones, and or when they're not with me in their own, they can think about perhaps new vocabularies of how to be with stones, which is basically a pile of gravel in common language. So a little bit of artistic magical manipulations and reconstructions and constitutions there for learning and change and transformation, but also coming to understand the world of nature of stones, which is a mountain that's been blown up into pieces. That's what we're working with as well. This video is the sixth in a series of videos I did, starting with this project as an artist in residence, then making some videos, really preliminary sketch talk videos, much like the one today. I'm just exploring it. These are not finely edited, no, not at all. And they are not highly conceived and planned out. Oh, here's the concepts, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. I really am just exploring, really like a child, adult, creative person, innovating and thinking about, are we doing early childhood education in the best way it could be done? Or even, can I come up with something different? Not just because I need to do that, but I like doing that. I don't like following the norms. And see if we can learn something. We being the society, we being the NIA staff and educators, and everybody else, the parents involved, and ultimately benefiting the children involved would be great. And the future of them as citizens for the kind of world of adaptive intelligence that they're going to need. This adaptive intelligence is one of the latest ideas coming out from the science of childhood development, the science of brain development, especially in the neurological. All these brain scans going on of how humans function and so on. We'll get some of that from Alison Gopnik's work as this cognitive psychologist philosopher of childhood. But these videos, you can follow me and my thinking, and that would be really interesting if somebody actually did that and looked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and this being, I think, the sixth one in the series. So I'm just going to read the titles to those videos. They do have a theme. I have called them the Stone Teachings, although one of the videos I didn't call that per se as the subtitle, Stone Teachings. And you can get the sense that I'm actually having the stones teach us, not just us teaching about the stones or how to get children to interact with stones. That's the more obvious pedagogical move going on, or strategy. But no, that's not what I'm actually interested in. Fundamentally, I'm interested in how the stones can be a teachings site, a teachings, bring a teachings from their ancient past, their ancient presence now, as I brought them onto the site of a particular school in contemporary 2021, 22. First video is taking children to the edge. Next one, maybe a quick comment on that, taking children to the edge. And that's really the edge of all kinds of things. That video, I think I'm exploring, again, I haven't listened to these for a long time. What does it mean to take children to the edge? And that's really an edge of where they're out of their comfort zone, as well as the educators who take them there. Yes. And of course, this could apply to parents as well and how you do parenting. So I'm really interested in edges as learning sites, as places of diverse change and surprise and unpredictability. And brain research now, several scientists exploring the brain have said, you want to know how a brain works, its fundamental drivers, its fundamental drivers for its own interest, its own development, its own extension of all those neurons, those mycelium of the human body, in a way, the connectors that make us intelligent, multi dimensions, come from seeking, curiosity, surprise, the edge. Yeah, you get the idea. The next one was co-potensity. It's entitled Beyond Needs in Childhood Education. Um, Co-potensity is a word I created and coined for the reason of when multiple co-things, more than one, comes together, they cooperate, they co-engage, co-create, etc. Create community, that co part of creating potential. So co-potency was just a conceptual idea that we ought to be looking as educators continually in how to create co-potensity within our learning sites. And beyond needs in early childhood, the subtitle of that video really is really core to some of my, perhaps maybe my more revolutionary radical thought. Not everybody's cup of tea, because people are very convinced that we need to be meeting the needs of children constantly in parenting, rearing, caring, medical services, all kinds of services for children. Uh, and of course, you can really say, well, yeah, because some people don't have their basic needs met. And if you look at more marginal and or very vulnerable populations for all kinds of reasons, color, race, etc., um, historical background and class, and etc., disabilities, so called, and other kinds of ways of limitations that are not comfortable, and in fact, very demanding, if not life threatening. Yes, those kinds of need based thinking paradigms, always thinking about the needs, that's the best service we can give in both care services as well as education and medical services, and just how to have healthy people who actually can survive. Well, I'm very skeptical of the overdrive. I'm not skeptical of providing people needs. No, I'm skeptical of the overdrive of that imposition of they need to have their needs met and netted around them and tied into them in every way we think about giving and offering what their potential is. And I'm saying, no, no, no. I think that'd be a real big mistake to overdrive the needs thing. That's my critique. You can check that video out, co-potensity. The third one is taking children to the dump. And dump has all kinds of connotations and interesting ones. And so really it's my interest to have educators, and really child educators particularly, think about what does it mean to take children to a site of excess, a site of even dirt, dump, a place where something has been left in excess that is not being valued. That's why it was dumped. It was neglected. So there's sites of neglect, not cared for. How can we, therefore, as educators, take children to these dump sites of all kinds? Think of that as the most biggest imagination can, but it could also include going to the dump, the city dump, if you will, or a recycling depot. But those are only just a few very minor examples of what I'm thinking about in a dump. So I dumped a pile of stones on the property of this childcare center, and I said, let's think about, and I invoke and invite the community around the school as well, how to be with this dump. Yeah, could be very creative and interesting, innovative site. The next one, moving through these more quickly now, taking children to the in-between, kind of self-explanational. That in-between is a very interesting space, kind of like an edge, but it's not quite an edge, it's something in between. And then Not Just a Stone was another video I did, where the confusion of using language. Oh, these are a bunch of stones. Oh, it's gravel. No, not just a stone. In fact, not a stone at all. You can actually move your thinking and your way of imagining and showing up in relationship to something like this stone being. Taking Children to the Nothing is probably the title of this one. We'll see if I actually title it that way. Taking people to the nothing. So let's begin that. A little bit of reading from Alison Gopnik, The Philosophical Baby. 1-month-olds stare at her mother's face with fixed brow wrinkling concentration and suddenly produces a beatific smile. Surely she must see her mother and feel love, but what are she actually seeing and feeling like inside for her? What is it like to be a baby? A 2-year-old offers a hungry-looking stranger a half-chewed lollipop. Could a child this young already feel empathy and be altruistic? A 3-year-old announces that she will come to dinner only if a place is laid for the babies, the tiny purple-haired twins who live in her pocket and eat flowers for breakfast. How could she believe so profoundly in something that is just a figment of her own imagination? And how could she dream up such remarkable creatures? A 5-year-old discovers, with the help of a goldfish, that death is irreversible. How could a child who can't read or add up uncover deep, hard truths about mortality? The 1-month-old turns into the 2-year-old, and then the 3-year-old, and the 5-year-old, and eventually, miraculously, turns into a mother, perhaps with children of her own. How could all of these utterly different creatures be the same person? All of us once were children, and most of us will become parents. We will have all asked these sorts of questions. Childhood is a profound part of the human condition, but it is also largely unexamined part of the human condition, so taken for granted that most of the time we hardly notice it at all. Childhood is a universal fact, but when we do think about it, it is almost always in individual first-person terms. We have a bias in how we think about childhood, I should say. What should I do now about my child, for example? What did my parents do that led me to be the way I am? Most books about children are like this, from memoirs and novels to the ubiquitous parenting advice books. But childhood is not just a particular plot complicated by English autobiographies, Irish autobiographies, or a particular problem to be solved by American self-help programs. It is not even just something that all human beings share. It is, I'll argue, what makes all human beings human. When we start to think about childhood more deeply, we realize that this universal, apparently simple fact is riddled with complexities and contradictions. Children are, at once, deeply familiar and profoundly alien. Just skip along. New scientific research and philosophical thinking have both illuminated and deepened the mystery of childhood. In the last 30 years, there's been a revolution in our scientific understanding of babies and young children. We used to think that babies and young children were irrational, egocentric, and amoral. Their thinking and experience were concrete, immediate, and limited. In fact, psychologists and neuroscientists have discovered that babies not only learn more, but imagine more, care more, and experience more than we would ever have thought possible. In some ways, young children are actually smarter, more imaginative, more caring, and even more conscious than adults are. Nice controversy there, Alison Gopnik. Okay. The quick overall summary of her view of childhood with this kind of new trend of the last 30 years, as she says, and new research on childhood. that really childhood is an evolutionary phase of the human species that is virtually unique and ought not be contaminated by adult world. Some of the new early childhood learning philosophies, there's, for example, we're working in this province, the BC Early Learning Framework has some of that same resonant philosophy that childhood has to be kept in its most important aspect for our human species. Yeah, not just the first person context of me, how do I raise my child? Me, the teacher, how do I educate that child? How does the child develop? All that is too individualized when we go there too often and think in those ways, always about individual need. No, this is the way I love about this new idea of a framework of understanding childhood that is evolutionary in the sense of childhood is this particular period. You can go as long as you want from zero or even pre birth, yes, to, I don't know, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, when childhood ends, so called, or shifts to tweens and then teens. Those are all pretty arbitrary in a certain kind of way, and I'm not really interested in those connections as, categories per se. But let's just keep this idea of childhood. We all have a sense of that world of childhood. That's what's important here. And it has to be kept unique, is what the new science is saying. Why? Because they children actually do learn better in that period than we do later as adults. Better meaning a lot of ways to qualify that. Certainly more imaginative, more creative, more neurological pathways of connections happening per moment than later on when we start to actually edit, get educated, get habitual too much, and we start learning a lot, losing a lot of those capacities. Now, those adult capacities are great for certain kinds of functions, but what the research is showing, and Gottnet points out in this book, please don't forget that children are incredibly philosophically important as philosophers. They offer so much to humanity as just a category of childness, childhoodness. And we ought to respect that and treat it as almost a unique subspecies. So, those are some of the languaging she will use, metaphors, ways to describe what's going on, that we can readjust so that we're not just trying to pull children up into adulthood and make them responsible and act like us as adults. And therefore, they'll be much easier to manage because then they think more like us. No, we actually want them to think not like us. Oh, well, that's pretty troublesome, right? If you're a school teacher or you have 14 kids or, a ratio of 7 to 1, like we have at your child care, daycare, there's a tendency to want them to think like us so that they will behave like us, and it's a lot easier to manage them than like cattle or pet. It's trained, conditioned, and then we'll all get along a lot easier, and it won't be such a hard job being a teacher, an educator, daycare center manager, etc. I think you get the idea of what my challenge here is when we actually look at early childhood education in a really serious way. I mean, a deep way. Yes, of course, we're serious about early childhood education. Those caregivers there, those teachers there, just like in schools, they're very committed. I have no doubt. Some obviously more than others, some much better teachers than others, and all that kind of thing. But the reality is, they take the job very seriously. I have no doubt. The problem is what kind of framework do you bring to that job, and when are your needs, the adult world, the managerial coming down from the top, from policy down to the schools, down to the daycares. to how they're supposed to manage and have to follow all these regulations, well, that starts to change and condition the way we are shaping and forcing and pushing childhood around. Well, let's stop pushing childhood around so much. Let's let childhood push us around a much. And it's going to be scientific based. If this is not just my personal subjective opinion, go and look at the science. That's what really I am doing. And when I say science, I am also including artistic science, if you want. Artistic endeavors and inquiries, of which the domain I come from as an artist, are hugely important in understanding and making connections to how children develop because of the ability to of artists to observe outside of frameworks that are normal. Thank goodness, right? They're artistic, they're aesthetic, they're moving in directions and imagining in directions, artistic ways of knowing, if you want to call it that, that can be complementary to the scientific approaches in neurobiology and science of the brain development, childhood, etc. So it's a combination. So I'm just making the point. It's not one or the other, but I'm emphasizing the artistic. So let me now go into the last part of the video, talking about my experience. So had some children. We designed a pedagogist and myself. I was leading the event, which was really just wanting to bring children back out to the stones, which I had now changed from basically when I first brought the project as artist in residence. I created a dump, which was this huge pile. Children observed it all. It was kind of ritualized, and it was really this idea that we've got new visitors here. I call them the stone people who have now visited us. How can we then play with and be with and get to know and learn from the stone peoples? Well, that was my ideal. How that actually plays out on a day-to-day basis in a daycare center like the one I'm at, or it could be anywhere if I drop this on a school ground, same problems of how do you get the engagement in a continuous way at the levels and depth of thinking and the philosophical inquiry and the artistic inquiry at the same time that really even scientific inquiry of utilizing these materials, so-called, right, these stone people's materials in this really important site like a lab, a laboratory of investigation. Well, that's hard. Bottom line is what I've learned because of there's so many limitations in how daycare schools work. That's not the point of this video. So what I did is was able to get them to bring out the 8 children that were there, 3 to 5-year-olds, and we had the pedagogist start with a drum. She's an Métis herself and has been very interested in the drum. She was given a drum by an Indigenous elder here in the local area, and she was drumming as the children came to the gate, right out of their comfort zone, their domestic site, where they spend all their time at the daycare, mostly. And as they come across the threshold of the gate, the drum is playing. The pedagogist also has this, wonderful Métis sash, beautiful colors. So there's this kind of rule, and then walk very slowly as the children follow. She invited them to follow her. I was at the stones. I no longer am using the stones as a sculpture because I was building the pile and doing various kinds of things, sometimes inviting the children, not too often. Mostly I was doing my own thing and then just leaving it for people to interact with or change. But now I've spread it out into an entire field. So it's 22 by 23 feet approximately, roughly a rectangular shape, takes up 2 parking stalls at the end of the parking lot. And it's right next to a little free library and a little sitting area of some planter boxes that the daycare is also made available. This is all open to the public. There's no fences around this. It's all wide open. And we're in an urban center, so kind of a bit of a rough area at times. Some of the activities going on there, of course, as you expect in most urban city centers. What is so interesting about spreading the stones into a field is that there's sort of no thing, right? There's no pile with some kind of sculpted presence that is an obvious thing to interact with, even though stones do spread out around the field of the bottom of the sculptures at times. And so what was so interesting is to have the children, slowly coming down with this drum beat, and the pedagogist had put, boughs of cedar around the perimeter, and we had done a ritual the day before. We had actually interacted with the stones, and we're kind of listening to what do the stones want, what do we want, what do we think the children may want, and just playing with that, in just hypothetical ways, not in a rigid kind of way. We weren't looking at curriculum guides and looking for books of activities to do. No, no, it's all arising from the stones, from the stone people, from the field. So now with this field, in a sense, what the children are encountering as they're walking up, and I put a big red blanket. I won't go into that story. It's a long story of why I've used this red blanket since the beginning of bringing the stone down. It's a huge, lovely, soft, felt like blanket, um, 9 by 12 feet kind of thing. And I just put that in the center of the stone so that when the children walk up, they get this visual impact of something, right? Because they're walking across the same gravel that my art field space lab is on of the same gravel. It's just I've chosen a stone that's a larger diameter than the ones that the cars are driving on and that the kids play in the playground, which was the gravel that was dumped when it was all built. This place 4 or 5 years ago. At least upgraded. It's been a little bit older facility than that. So the children are experiencing, walking on the gravel, hearing the footsteps, hearing the drum beat, coming up to this, what we had as a kind of a gateway because of the way we laid out the boughs of the cedar. And I was standing at the gateway entrance and in my white artist coat. Won't go into all the details. It would just take an hour or two to actually describe the fine details of what we did went on. It was really fun exploring how you could set up a sacred site, right? A sacred site to enter for experience. There's no thing there. That red blanket, we did a little ritual and then we folded up the blanket, took it off. This is a very important moment. And when that happened, all of a sudden, the children were exposed. They had this, as I say, quite a huge space of just flat stones, gravel. But the ritual we did took them into an imaginal world. Again, I can't describe that here. It would just take too long. And then watched for the next amount of time. We had no idea. The pedagogist and I kept saying, well, we'll be lucky if we can keep them there for 20 minutes. On this field. Again, it's not a sculpture in a way, it's just a field. It's like a context. And it's just this flat medium of stones that all kind of look a lot alike unless you go down and look at them carefully. Right? No bright colors, no different sizes. No, they're all pretty very similar. They're made that way, they're manufactured that way to be decorating people's driveways. Decorating for usefulness of driving a car over. Anyways, or your sidewalks to walk on. It's a cheap way of building a sidewalk. Gravel, I've seen it. The place I live has these stones actually as part of the walkways. The children have to then negotiate this, in a way, a troubled space of nothing. And the only guidance I gave them at the beginning as they entered to go into this space, I said, you're going to be making an art studio today. An art studio is where artists make things and create art. That's all they said. None of the children asked questions. They're such tiny little tots, And I'm just like, oh, there was a little bit of conversation I had. I don't even remember in the spot because things are happening so spontaneously. But I am engaging them to make them feel a certain sense of comfort. They know me a little bit. They've seen me on site a few times, so I'm not brand new, but I'm still pretty strange to them. And then this space is like for most of them is pretty strange too. Like I think if one or two had seen me with the stone before, but I don't even think actually any of them yesterday had seen the stones before. So this field, they now have, and nobody's telling them what to do. The only tools I asked the teachers to bring down was maybe some trowels, maybe some cups or things that they could dig or mark with, but or draw into the stones with, right? By just moving things around and carving and making whatever they're going to do and build this studio, whatever that is. And then I said, bring us, some hard surface hardboards, clipboards, with some pieces of paper, and bring some pencils down. And particularly graphite pencils is what the pedagogist liked, and I saw there was a few colored pencils that the staff brought, and those were all just available if they want them. We didn't say this is what to use or anything; just left them there in the baskets outside of this sacred space of this field of stones. And then the rest, things happen. Almost an hour and a half we were out there. I was surprised how long they stayed in with the stones. And I could definitely see it's a troubling space. Some kids, kiddos jumping onto maybe the highest rising point. There was a little bit of a pile left in one of the corners. They were going to build, and there's a sign that I had stuck in of an exclamation mark just sitting there. It's something I used in the installation last year. I like the idea of just putting an exclamation mark on a sign and sticking it in the stones. And yeah, what was that going to do? What's it going to mean for people? Well, one of the children quickly ran up to the sign and said, kind of at the top of the pile, um, very obviously, very explorer type archetype, and the domination of the human species always wanting to dominate nature. I found the North Pole. I'm going to dig a tunnel here and build a wall. And all of it. He's one of the most older of the 3 to 5 year olds. I'm not sure exactly how old this young man is, but he's just totally into just going to create this space. Well, then I watched everybody else. He had one person who really went with him and hung out with him, and his buddy, and they worked a long time on building things. But I watched all the others, and it was like, whoa, it was a very puzzling space for them to enter. So this is the concept I've used of minusio. I talked about it in one of my videos on something else at some point. I can't remember exactly where that is, minusio. And I've written an article about the stone project at this daycare center and the concept of minusio for myself as an artist. This word emerge, minus, and I just like the idea of the sound minusio, minusing. And how is it that you can take spaces or processes, encounters with children, with as an artist as well, with materials or environments, contexts, and minus continually, and or the simple language is how can you get more, have more happen by doing less, having less, by minusing, right? The minusio effect. And that's really what the stone field is now. Instead of being sculpture, it's really nothing. It's been gone through this process of minusiization, I suppose, that really the children just really, you could feel it, not really sure what to do. And the material itself, these stones that hang together, and they're somewhat heavy at a certain level, and they're not easy to work with. It's not like sand, not like silt, it's not like flour, it's not like soft clay. No, you've got resistance, and that's because it's a mountain. That's because this is the place of the stone peoples. They come from this place of the earth, solidness of the earth, the mountain foundation. So this material resonates and has all those properties of resistance, of incredibly eternal nature of stability and time, and yet it's all in fragments. So everything, every time a child moves on top of the stone, it's constantly shifting. Everything's moving. You're literally walking, but you're actually rolling across these stones, turning and moving and rolling. They have so little cohesion, but they are resistant to work with compared to most materials that we would give young children. And I found that very interesting to watch. So um, I'll end the video now on really just saying how long they stayed on the stones was remarkable. Definitely struggle for most. And I say struggle, that's my interpretation. Maybe each of us as adult educators, we haven't got our heads together to talk about this project fully and what we witnessed yesterday. But I think we were aware, and even the staff, in a sense, are aware. Well, like, how do you facilitate what's going on? Well, sure, you can be with their play, but I actually was more interested in them not just playing, but actually solving problems. The problems that minusio, the nothingness, and the intensity and density of the material, even though it's fragmented and rolling and shifting, how do you work with that as a medium? And I did see many children struggle. I'm just going to use that word. It's a good struggle. And it's an uncomfortable struggle, to the point of some children starting to, quote, get bored because it's kind of a boring sight. And I like that idea. That part of minusio is simplifying, right? Taking it right down to the Zen, in a sense, of the no thingness of reality, so that we're not constantly stimulated by things and children being attracted there to that thing, that toy, that puzzle piece of the puzzle to fit. This didn't fit. There's no, like, it's a puzzle, but none of the pieces, fit to show something that you're actually making progress and gain, like putting a puzzle together pieces. So it's a really interesting connection with pieces of nature. So please keep that in mind. Everything I'm talking about with the stone project is nature. It's nature based from start to finish. And it is a really interesting encounter. And I came away this morning. I woke up and said, I got to do a video on this. And said, that's a lab. That's a learning lab. When I came to the daycare center, I said, because they were building a new building in the next property, I said, are you going to build a child's learning lab? And the owner director at the time who owns the space and is building it, um, she said, oh, well, what would that look like? Okay, I said, well, it'd be a big space with nothing in it. Yeah. I just know, and I'm not the only one who's thought of child labs or the black box theater used in drama education, that you create these spaces that, there's no thing in it. In a way, you're creating context of experience. And so that's the kind of artist I am playing with now, how to bring that into social spaces where people just have a context and there's no thingness there. Um, you may have obvious little indicators like the sign, that I had left there was a thing. Yeah, and the stones in a way are things. And the space is kind of a thing, but they're very minimalist, as you can tell. Everything is really brought down to, as I say, this no thingness, this minusio effect. Well, then this also what was interesting was little plants are starting to grow up through the stones, and they're coming up rather rapidly since I laid all the stones down. And once in a while, I clean them off, and I like to have just the stones. But then I like to leave them as well. And the children were playing on the stones, and no one that I heard in the whole over an hour and a half playing in and around the stones mentioned that, oh, look, there's a plant coming up through the stones. How and wanted to track it or trace it. No curiosity there at all. And to me, that's actually enormously interesting. Like, why would not that be fascinating to a child that a plant is coming up through stones? How does it do that? How does it? Why is it there? What could it be? How could I never saw any child put it into their imaginary play? So that's just one little quick observation. There's so many, as I say. But then within sort of, I would say, the kind of hour, coming up to the hour, I could start to see children starting to be, quote, bored. They had run into enough challenges using that material as stones that weren't getting a lot of, quote, reward, right? And excitement and all the things that we think children need. I don't think they need those things. I think they're used to them because they get so much. And these are very quite highly privileged kids that come to our program. It's very expensive to come to this program relative. So these children are confronted with too much nothingness, boringness. What do you do with it? And I was just watching the limitations of their own capabilities to imagine and how they'll seek an easier way out. We all do that, right? I mean, you get confrontations, you get barriers, and you can handle that for a while. And then if it's just troublesome, you want to zip out and try and find something easier and more fun, more rewarding, more dopamine, positive effect in the brain, chemistry. Well, I like minusio because it continually keeps the tension on of not having easy escape out. Of course, we're not going to force the children to stay on the stones. And we knew that they probably would start to shift. I thought 15 to 20 minutes and they're going to shift. It took an hour before they started to shift. And they shifted by a particular intervention that happened by one of the children. Happened to be the one who discovered the North Pole and was taking a tunnel, for the whole town, as he spoke about it. And he basically said, where are the dinosaurs? At one point I did mention dinosaurs and just some conversation at the intro. Um, we'll go into that, how I did that within the ritual of the ceremony at the beginning. And the child basically said, where are those dinosaurs? It's kind of like getting bored. Like, let's go look for dinosaur bones. This is like boring, even though he didn't say that. But I said, well, I don't know. Have you got a map for where the dinosaurs are? Because he was drawing maps earlier on his paper. And I thought that was really intriguing. And that's a whole other thing. Like, what were those maps about that he started drawing actually before he started working on the stones too heavily in that particular corner? And he says to me, very logically, right, this little guy, well, how can I draw a map of where the dinosaurs are if I don't know where the dinosaurs are? And I said, oh, good point. And so and by that time it said, well, somebody found a stick just at that moment at the edge of the stones in these planter boxes, which are 3-4 feet high, full of stone, sort of soft mulch and dirt, and some plants growing in them, not a lot. And found a stick there, and I said, "Oh, can I have that stick?" And then I started playing, pretending that maybe I was going to try to find the dinosaurs, like kind of using the stick like a water rod, that finds water wells. And I played with that a little bit. But they weren't too interested, and then at some point I said, "Well, maybe the dinosaurs are places where you can dig, and it's easier to dig deep." And I said, "Maybe in the soil in those boxes." Well, boom. Uh, 3 or 4 of them went for it, started digging, took their cups, took the stick, and by then everybody was at the planter boxes digging in the dirt. And I thought that immediate shift was the release. Oh, finally, something soft to work with where we can actually get some progress. And then a little excitement, possibly looking for dinosaur bones, even if I'm not sure if they believed that they would find any or not. It was still fun to play that game out, that narrative. And so, yeah, we all moved over to that, and the stones never were played with again until we did a final ritual with the stones again. I cannot go into the details. So that's a long enough conversation. And just to say, it was really interesting to watch. Eventually, some getting bored, quote, of working in the dirt, because really there was nothing there but your imagination and dirt. And it was in a planter box, kind of small and bordered. And I always have felt and seen this with children experiencing as I watch. They want those smaller containers than the big field of the stones. It's just a little too overwhelming, it seems, for them to know how to create in it. And I don't think that that's just because they're not used to that. That is not a play field. for most children, um, that kind of material. So, and the amount of space that it was without having, borders and boxes and smaller containers seems to be a certain comfort level there. I think you could get around that with practice and bringing children to the stones field more often. I think it needs to be repeated so that they work through their problem solving and the boredness problem. And that's where the brain goes into, it will create solutions and it will do this adaptive. How do you adapt to this environment? But we need to keep, in a sense, and I think it's a good idea to keep children challenged by spaces that are in minusio, not with excess choices constantly, even though imaginative choices are, you know, constantly there and available. But a laziness will slip in, a habit will slip in to try and get the easy way, the easy choice out of that challenge. So I'm asking, early childhood educators and even artists and artist educators to continually bring challenge, not just play space and multiple choices for children to make all the time. They need limiting constraints, which are enabling. They're enabling constraints, actually, as some philosophers use this term. I like that a lot. Enables through constraint. And the boxes, again, more comfortable. They had a little less constraint with having to manipulate the stones and what can you do with those stones. And the soil was just much more comfortable and relaxing, easy to get progress, right? Deeper holes and piles. Feels nice too. And then watched as that went on for 15, 20 minutes. Then a few of the children started moving off that, and they started going into the library box and pulling out library books to read and take back to their class. And so those are the comforts, right? Like those are what they can, nice container, pictures and words in a book. That so I'm really interested in the expansion and then the need for a certain amount of anxiety of challenge, that they want to get the easier solution that's familiar. And I think we as educators want to continually challenge that so that the familiar to cope with anxiety or challenge when the brain's having to work harder, um, let's make that more exciting and then get them used to it more often. So that's some of my summary for today. Thanks for listening in today. Look forward to your comments, and I'll probably do more videos on as I learn more from the other pedagogues as well and teachers, what the experience was like and the effects on the children. But just to keep in mind, this is not a one visit experience. To get the optimum use of the Stonefield as a learning lab site, bring it on, bring them on. And I invite other schools, daycare centers around this city as a way to bring them in, and other people in other places. Bring a half load dump of stones and put it on your property and see what happens. Okay. Enough for now. Feel free to contact me anytime. I'll put my email in the comment below on this video, so you can contact me if you want any assistance or would like me to facilitate anything. Let's keep conversation going about using the Stonefield, the no thingness of learning.